worse than expected. 336 and 68 vehicles. 336,068 vehicles delivered in the first quarter for Tesla. For a point of reference, the street was expecting, the street account was expecting, based on analyst expectations.
Today we will witness the shocking fall of one of the brightest symbols of the American economy, Tesla. In a matter of weeks, the company that was once considered the pride of the country and the leader of the electric revolution has turned into a financial nightmare. Imagine $135 billion in market value vanished like smoke. And that's no accident. It all started with an economic ambush, thought out over years. Europe and Canada launched a massive trade attack that no one expected. And if you thought this was just a reaction to global economic crisis, you're wrong. It's much deeper than that.
371, most were saying 350 to 360. Now they're coming in at 336,068, production of 362,615. So for some point of reference here, you're going back to Q2, maybe Q1 of 2022 in terms of the last time that they had production this or deliveries this low for one quarter. So again, Tesla deliveries worse than expected at just over 336,000 deliveries in the first quarter. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
That's horrible. Can I just ask Phil, how about the Cybertruck? How's that doing? You got a little inventory there in the Cybertruck?
Who would have thought that the US and Tesla in particular would face such a fierce international wave of retaliation, protests in front of dealerships, panic on Wall Street, and most importantly, the reaction of ordinary Americans who feel betrayed by their favorite brand? Why is Tesla, once a favorite of many, now synonymous with financial collapse and political storm? It's becoming increasingly clear that this is not just a company crisis, but a true economic disaster for the entire country. So why did it happen? Why was Tesla caught in the middle of a global trade war? What was the reason that the Canadian government decided to freeze all payments and exclude the company from federal programs, and the European Union imposed draconian duties on it? These are not coincidences, but the result of a long-term political struggle and mistakes that have now come crashing down on America's biggest brand.
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker, but that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you'd see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
It was all planned for years, but at some point the chain of events spiraled out of control. And the scary thing is, it didn't stop at Tesla. At the same time, an even deeper crisis was brewing within the company itself that destroyed it from within. The lightning loss of trust from investors and employees who began to leave en masse slowed production and deliveries, and product prices rose so much that Tesla was no longer affordable for the average consumer.
So there are a couple of things that might be going on here. So on the one hand, it could be that just at a very basic level, Musk has quickly observed a 40% decline in sales in Tesla in Europe.
But what's next for the company? Is a recovery possible? Or is Tesla doomed to become just an example of how ambition and politics can destroy a giant? But we'll also see other global players like Volkswagen and China's BYD capitalize on this disaster to finally push Tesla out of the global market. Are you ready to learn all the details of how Tesla, the leader that epitomizes the American dream, fell in an instant, and what it means for the entire US economy? This won't just be the story of the company's downfall, but a lesson for the world on how quickly what seemed invincible can collapse.
Running around on stage with the Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do. What a creep, what a jerk. Like who derives joy?
In recent weeks, the world has witnessed the sudden fall of Tesla, a company that not so long ago was considered the pride of the American economy. This is not just a corporate crisis, but a real economic cataclysm that resulted in the loss of $135 billion in market value in just a few days. Tesla was once a symbol of progress, innovation, and ambition, but now, in the eyes of many, it has become the epitome of financial collapse and political failure. The reasons for this downfall lie in a combination of many factors, but most importantly, it was politics, economic sanctions, and trade wars that played a decisive role.
Does that help Tesla? I mean, you had Tim Waltz, who's a huge jerk, right?
But what happened to bring down such a powerful company so quickly? Let's start with the fact that Tesla, first and foremost, was dependent on foreign supplies. Its manufacturing needed batteries and key components like lithium, cobalt, and aluminum, which came from Canada, Europe, and China. Although Tesla's factories were located in California and Texas, the company's supply chain was closely tied to international markets. This dependence became its Achilles heel. When the former Trump administration announced in March 2025 that it would raise tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods by 25% and add an additional 10% on energy exports from Canada, it was the first blow to the company. Tesla faced rising production costs almost overnight, which had an immediate impact on its prices and competitiveness.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
But that was just the beginning. Higher tariffs on goods from Europe, including car components, made the situation even more critical. A key component in the manufacturing process is batteries, which Tesla sources from third-party suppliers, including China and Canada. On top of that, as tariffs increased, so did the prices of semiconductors, sensors, and other key elements. The problem was that when these components became more expensive, Tesla was at an impasse: either raise the prices of its cars, which could scare consumers away, or absorb those additional costs, which jeopardized the company's profitability. And, as we can see, Tesla was not able to do this successfully. It chose both options, resulting in a double failure.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Tesla's manufacturing facilities, despite being in the US, relied heavily on foreign components, and when the price of these components skyrocketed, the company was on the verge of financial collapse. Protests against the price hike of Tesla cars began to emerge in different parts of the US, especially in states where Tesla had a strong presence, such as Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. At first, it was social campaigns calling for a boycott of the brand, but soon the protests turned into actual demonstrations outside dealerships. Customers who had previously seen Tesla as a model of technological innovation now saw the company as a brand that had problems not only with its production costs, but with its very business strategy. This began to change the perception of Tesla in the domestic market and caused many potential buyers to begin to refuse to purchase a car from the brand.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
But the trade war and domestic crisis is only part of the story. While Tesla was facing this storm in the US, an even larger tragedy was unfolding on the international stage. The Canadian government, embittered by trade sanctions, announced that Tesla would no longer receive federal subsidies to buy electric cars. This decision was not only related to tariffs, but also to allegations of financial fraud on Tesla's part that allegedly violated Canadian laws. As a result of this move, Tesla lost its position in the Canadian market, which was the second largest market for the company after the United States. At the same time, the European Union imposed new tariffs on US goods, including electric vehicles, and a number of countries such as Germany, France, and Italy began to exclude Tesla from electric vehicle subsidy programs, shifting their attention to local manufacturers such as Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
These measures were a serious blow to Tesla, as the company was losing crucial export channels that provided a significant portion of its revenues. Meanwhile, the situation in America was becoming increasingly tense. Investors on Wall Street began to panic and the company's stock was falling rapidly. As early as April 2025, just weeks after the new duties were imposed, Tesla saw a drop in demand for its cars in both domestic and foreign markets. Exports to Europe and Canada were down 40%, and US sales fell 22% in just one quarter. But it wasn't just a financial slump. It was the beginning of a political crisis that engulfed not just economies, but entire countries.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
Tesla found itself at the center of an international conflict. The Canadian government expressed displeasure that Tesla was using foreign components, which they felt was negatively impacting the Canadian economy. European countries, in turn, saw Tesla as a threat to their local manufacturers and decided to take advantage of the situation to squeeze it out of the market. This diplomatic and economic conflict was the catalyst that accelerated Tesla's downfall. From time to time, President Musk has shown his unpopular stance on social media, which only added fuel to the fire. His ties to the former Trump administration was another reason why politicians in Europe and Canada began to see Tesla as part of a political game rather than an independent and honest player in the market. Thus, Tesla's downfall was not an accident, but the result of a series of political and economic decisions that proved to be devastating for the company. The situation was a harbinger of much more serious problems for the entire US economy.
Tesla shares have slumped by more than 9% amid a fall in sales in Europe. The electric vehicle maker posted lower sales across 5 European countries, including France and the UK. Joining us now to discuss this is CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio. Remy, why do we believe these sales are dropping? What's driving that?
Sure. Well, Errol, basically what Elon Musk has been talking about over the past, say, few months, ever since Donald Trump's election back to the White House, that has been fueling this anger, this frustration, some even say disgust towards Musk, and they're taking it out on Tesla. Tesla now feeling the pain. But because of what's happening here in Europe, Tesla sales fell by nearly half across the continent just last month, 45%.
After the international trade war against Tesla flared up with renewed vigor, the situation for the company became catastrophic. But it wasn't just political decisions by governments and the economy that fell apart down the chain. At the same time, a real internal revolution began, which intensified an already tragic picture. It wasn't just investors and governments in Canada and Europe that began to turn away from Tesla. Finding itself in the midst of an economic crisis, it became increasingly difficult for the company itself to maintain control of its reputation and its relationship with consumers. Suddenly everyone, including Elon Musk himself, started hearing protests from those who used to support Tesla the most. We all remember how Tesla was seen as a symbol of the automotive revolution, but now rallies and protests began to take place on the streets of major American cities like Detroit, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. This was not just a wave of discontent, but a real upheaval in the relationship between the company and its customers. Customer anger and frustration began to manifest in earnest, and this was not a random event.
We've accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
He praised all the domestic actions he has taken so far on immigration,
and I deployed the U.S. military and border patrol to repel the invasion of our country.
And spending cuts.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple.
Initially, the protests started on social media with calls to boycott Tesla products. However, soon it began to grow into real actions. The first pickets appeared near Tesla dealerships. People demanded lower prices, return trust, and stop playing political games. The working class, which in fact created the demand for Tesla electric cars, was particularly affected. Their frustration was a key element in the decay of Tesla's image. Even among those who had supported Musk and his company, criticism began to be voiced. People who once saw Tesla as a source of pride now saw it as just another political tool used for the interests of the rich and powerful. Amidst this social tension, a political crisis within the country began. Local communities began to see Tesla as a product in which American workers no longer found value. This is not just an economic crisis, but a real battle for the future of the country. Workers protested against price increases, tariffs, and how the company was becoming part of the political fray. The intervention of Musk, who could not stay calm in such a situation, only added fuel to the fire. In moments of economic decline, when everything is falling apart, it's especially important who leads the company. Musk, who has always been characterized by ambition and harsh statements, was unable to provide stability in this situation.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
His public antics amid falling stock prices and growing public discontent have only served to amplify the effect. Speaking in television interviews, he allowed himself statements such as, "If you don't like volatility, don't buy Tesla." These words came as a real shock to investors, who at the time were looking for some reassurance about the stability of the company. Investors began dumping their shares, and this process only accelerated the decline. In the world of investments, where trust and confidence in the future are crucial, such statements could not but lead to negative consequences.
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
But the problem wasn't just with consumer and investor relations. It was a disaster for the very structure of the company. As protests erupted and a wave of boycotts began, Tesla's internal problems began to surface. Workers who had once been inspired by the company's mission began to lose faith in its future. It became apparent that the company itself lacked the strength to retain its employees, especially as the prospects for the future became less and less clear. In April 2025, unauthorized strikes began in Texas at the Gigafactory, which soon spread to other regions. Workers protested frozen wages and forced rework, which became a necessity as component costs rose due to tariffs. Anxiety within the factories only grew, and soon several key engineers and managers left their positions, further hampering production. It was a crisis not only of foreign policy, but also of the company's internal relations, with the labor force bearing the responsibility for the future of the entire business.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
At this time, another equally catastrophic transformation was taking place. The international market began to move blatantly toward competitors. When Tesla stopped responding to the demands of global buyers, other players such as Volkswagen and China's BYD entered the market. These companies capitalized on Tesla's crisis by offering more affordable and higher quality alternatives. Volkswagen, for example, not only lowered the price of its electric cars, but also utilized internal resources and its strong networks to quickly capture the market share that Tesla once held. BYD, the Chinese automaker that had always been under its thumb, was preparing for the moment when Tesla would lose its status, and that moment came just as it was falling. Meanwhile, the company could no longer count on support from government subsidies. In response to the trade war and worsening economic situation, many governments began to reconsider policies toward US manufacturers, and Tesla was among those who lost subsidies and incentives. The withdrawal of federal subsidies for the purchase of electric cars was a real blow to Tesla, and its position in the global market began to weaken rapidly. And then political allies of the competitors came into play, who actively supported the transition to European and Chinese brands. Thus, Tesla found itself not only in an economic, but also in a political crisis. This whole situation was a disaster not only for the company, but also for the US economy as a whole. Taking into account that Tesla occupied an important place in the investment portfolios of the largest American banks, its collapse was a significant blow to the entire financial system. For example, more than $200 billion from pension funds and hedge funds were invested in Tesla, and this money became unprofitable after its collapse. This caused a reaction throughout the financial arena, and within weeks of Tesla's collapse, signs of economic instability began to show. Markets began to panic, and a wave of financial problems affected not only the auto industry, but other sectors of the economy as well. Meanwhile, Musk found himself in a difficult situation where every move was under public scrutiny. As the man at the center of it all, he became the target of attacks and criticism from all sides. All he could do was try to keep his confidence in his words, but his public antics and statements became evidence that perhaps his ambition was stronger than his actual ability to handle the crisis. He found himself moving further and further away from the people who were once his most loyal supporters. All Tesla had left was trying to salvage what could be salvaged, but everyone already realized that the company had already crossed a line after which recovery would be an incredibly difficult and long process. This process finally raised the question, can Tesla go back to being what it was? Or was its collapse a harbinger for all American giants facing global competition and internal problems?